I never thought that at my 68 years of age, I would have to start all over again. Chincoteague has been my home for almost 5 decades, ever since Oswald and I bought a veterinary clinic on the outskirts of town. It's a place where the sea breeze mingles with the smell of pine trees, and the morning's fogs turn the streets into a ghost movie set. Every morning, waking up in my old house on Pine Street, I watch the sun cut through the blinds with thin streaks of light. My fingers, curved with arthritis from decades of working with animals, reached almost instinctively for the photograph on my bedside table, Oswald with our children, Rowena and Silas, taken 30 years ago on the beach. Oswald had passed away 22 years ago, a heart attack during a morning jog. Ridiculous and unexpected, as often happens with everything important in our lives. His heart, his weak spot from his youth, simply stopped one April Tuesday, leaving me with two teenagers and a business I only half understood. Silas was in 10th grade at the time, a tall, awkward kid stuck between childhood and adulthood. After his father died, it was like he'd shut himself away. I was too busy surviving to properly help him deal with his grief. Perhaps that's why, after graduating from high school, he left to study on the West Coast and never returned to Chincoteague for good. Now he's a geology professor in Portland, married to a nice woman named Pearl, raising two teenage sons. He calls once a week, comes for Christmas, but I always feel like there's something unspoken between us. Rowena, on the other hand, was different. At 13, she reacted to her father's death in her own way, not by withdrawing into herself, but with a kind of feverish activity, helping me at the clinic, taking over household chores, learning to cook. Perhaps her way of coping with the loss was to become indispensable, to make sure those left behind didn't disappear too. Rowena had always been more like me, the stubborn chin, the brown hair, the habit of wrinkling her nose when she didn't like something. The only things she had inherited from Oswald were his eyes, dark blue, almost violet in certain lights. With those eyes and personality, she could have chosen any guy in Chincoteague. Why she chose Elijah Huddleston is still a mystery to me. Elijah was a good man, intelligent, educated, with a gentle nature. He worked as a science teacher at a local school and was a keen ornithologist. He and Rowena had a lot in common: love of nature, calm judgment, persistence. But Elijah was accompanied by his mother, Beatrice Huddleston, and that changed everything. Beatrice belonged to the oldest family in Chincoteague. The Huddlestons owned most of the coastal area even before the place became a tourist destination. Although much of the family fortune had been lost by the present time, Beatrice continued to act as if she still held the entire town in her fist. She ran an antique store in the historic center, was president of the Historical Society, and considered her lineage almost royal. When Rowena first brought Elijah to a family dinner, I hadn't given much thought to the differences in our social standing. Oswald and I had never been poor. The veterinary clinic brought in a steady income. But we were simple people. I grew up on a farm in West Virginia. Oswald was the son of a mailman. We earned everything through our own labor. For Beatrice, however, we weren't good enough. I'll never forget her first visit to our house. She looked around with a look on her face, as if she was afraid of getting dirty. The look she gave my collection of porcelain elephants on the mantelpiece could freeze the Gulf of Mexico in August. "What? Interesting things," she said then, pausing before the word interesting so that its true meaning was obvious. I was trying to impress that day by making my signature crab casserole, a recipe I was proud of. Beatrice took a tiny portion and barely touched it. "I have a very sensitive stomach," she explained. "Seafood is so folk, as if being folk was something to be ashamed of." Rowena and Elijah's wedding took place 8 years ago. Beatrice insisted on a ceremony in the Episcopal Church. Even though our family had never been particularly religious, she took it upon herself to organize the reception, turning it into a social event where I felt like a stranger at my own daughter's party. After the wedding, the newlyweds settled into the house that had once belonged to Elijah's grandfather, 2 blocks from Beatrice's mansion. Too close for my taste. Beatrice was in the habit of just dropping in on them several times a week, always with helpful tips on how to run the household, what curtains to hang, and what brand of coffee to buy. Rowena, always strong and direct with everyone else, became unrecognizably quiet around Beatrice. Elijah, the only son, was accustomed not to contradict his mother. So began years of quiet tension in which I could only watch from the sidelines, supporting my daughter but trying not to interfere too much. 6 years of Rowena and Elijah trying to have a child. 6 years of hopes, disappointments, tests, doctor's visits, and all the while, Beatrice never missed an opportunity to remind them that our family had never had a problem with childbearing, and that the Huddlestons had always been a fertile family. It was as if the lack of pregnancy was Rowena's personal failure, further proof of her inferiority. My daughter never cried in front of me, inherited my habit of keeping my emotions to myself, but I knew that every month brought her a new batch of grief. I learned to recognize the signs: tense shoulders, tight lips, overly chosen words when speaking. So when the phone rang that Sunday morning and I heard Rowena's voice shaking with ill-concealed excitement, my heart sank. "Mom, do you have a minute?" There was something in her voice that made me clutch the receiver tighter. "Of course, dear. What's wrong?" There was a pause, then a deep breath. "Elijah and I," her voice broke. "Mom, I'm pregnant. 13 weeks. The doctor says everything looks good." I slumped back in my chair, suddenly feeling weak in my knees. "Oh, Rowena," was all I could squeeze out. "We've been waiting to make sure everything was all right," she continued, the words coming out of her in a flood. "After all these years, I'm still afraid to believe it, but the ultrasound said everything was fine. It's a girl, Mom. We're having a daughter." I couldn't hold back the tears. So many years of waiting, so much disappointment, and now it's finally happening. "I'm so happy for you, honey. So happy." "We want you to come to dinner next weekend," Rowena said. "We'll tell everyone officially. Elijah is calling his mother right now." The mention of Beatrice brought me back to earth. Of course, she's going to be the grandmother of this baby, too. "How do you think she'll react?" I asked cautiously. Rowena sighed, and in that sigh, I heard years of tension. "She'll be pleased to have an heir to the Huddleston family," my daughter said, with a hint of bitterness. "Though of course she'll find a way to remind me that I should have gotten pregnant sooner." "Don't let her mar your joy," I said, feeling the familiar prick of irritation. "This is your child, your happiness." "I know, Mom. Don't worry, I can handle it." When we finished talking, I sat looking at Oswald's picture for a long time. How happy he would be to know he was going to be a grandfather. How much he had missed. That night I couldn't sleep. Joy for my daughter was mixed with anxiety. I knew Beatrice Huddleston well enough to know that she wouldn't miss the opportunity to turn this pregnancy into another way to control her son and daughter-in-law's lives. She would have an opinion on everything from the choice of name to the color of the walls in the nursery, from the method of feeding to the choice of lullabies. But I promised myself that I would stand by Rowena, support her decisions, no matter what Beatrice said. After all, I'm going to be a grandmother too, and I wouldn't let anyone, not even the arrogant Beatrice Huddleston, ruin that happiness for my family. In the morning, I called Silas to share the news. He was happy for his sister, though I sensed a note of regret in his voice, perhaps because of the distance that would prevent him from being near his newborn niece. He promised to fly over as soon as he could carve out time between lectures. Looking at the falling fall leaves outside my window, I thought about the new life that would emerge in the spring, of a new chapter for all of us. And despite my fears, I felt hope warm and bright, like a ray of sunlight cutting through the Chincoteague morning fog. Ariel was born on April 27th, the same day that Chincoteague wild horses traditionally return to the coastal grasslands after wintering in more sheltered areas. I took this as a good omen, a natural blessing for my granddaughter. The labor was difficult. Rowena spent nearly 20 hours in the delivery room before she was born. A little girl weighing 3 kilograms and 200 grams, with a mop of dark hair and a surprisingly attentive gaze for a newborn. When the nurse placed her in my arms, I felt the same thrill I had felt 40 years ago when I first held Rowena. "She's beautiful," I whispered, looking at the tiny face. Elijah, pale with fatigue and excitement, nodded, unable to say a word. He hadn't left Rowena's side during the entire labor, holding her hand, wiping the sweat from her forehead, whispering words of encouragement. In that moment, I was grateful for his devotion to my daughter, for the love I saw in his eyes as he looked at his newborn daughter. Rowena, exhausted but happy, called the baby's name, Ariel Delilah Huddleston. Upon hearing my name as my granddaughter's middle name, I couldn't hold back the tears. It was one of those rare moments of pure joy that happen infrequently in life and are remembered forever. Beatrice arrived at the hospital an hour after Ariel was born. She entered the room with a huge basket full of top-quality baby supplies and a bouquet of white lilies that instantly filled the room with a strong scent that made Rowena cringe. She had always had a sensitivity to strong odors. "Well, show me my granddaughter," Beatrice demanded, barely saying hello. Elijah carefully took the baby from Rowena's arms and handed it to his mother. Beatrice accepted the bundle with professional confidence, as if she held babies every day, even though Elijah was her only child. She took a long look at Ariel's face, and I could see her smile growing strained. "She's cute," she finally said in a tone that made it clear the child was not what she'd expected. "But not at all like the Huddlestons. All the children in our family are born blonde." Rowena and Elijah exchanged quick glances. "Mama was dark-haired," I reminded her gently. "Genetics is a complicated thing." Beatrice gave me a look of disagreement, but didn't say anything as she handed the baby back to Elijah. For the first 2 weeks after Ariel was born, I practically lived in Rowena and Elijah's house, helping with the baby. They were days filled with quiet joys, feedings in the wee hours of the morning when the whole world seemed to consist of just the three of us, the smell of baby shampoo, tiny fingers gripping my finger with surprising strength. I watched Rowena settle into the role of mother, tentative at first, then more and more confident. Beatrice visited every day, always with gifts and always with comments. She brought antique silver rattles that were too heavy for a newborn, and antique lace blankets too fragile for practical use. Each of her visits turned into a little lecture on the traditions of the Huddleston family and how important it was to observe them. "All the Huddlestons were baptized in this christening shirt," she said one day, pulling a yellowed lace garment out of a box. "It was made for my great-grandfather in the year 1872. Rowena looked questioningly at the fragile fabric. "It's very beautiful, Beatrice, but I don't think it's worth the risk. It's so old." "Nothing will happen to it," Beatrice cut her off. "6 generations of Huddlestons have worn it, and nothing has happened to it. If you treat it right, of course." There was a clear implication in her voice that she doubted Rowena's ability to handle family heirlooms properly. Gradually, I began to notice a change in Beatrice's behavior toward Ariel. While in the early days, she had at least tried to feign affection, as time went on, her frustration became almost palpable. She rarely picked up the baby and never offered to help with nursing, unlike me. Ariel is so active, not at all like Elijah at that age, she often said. He was such a calm, golden child, never cried for no reason. I could see how these constant comparisons hurt Rowena, how she began to doubt her mothering abilities. After Beatrice left, I often found my daughter in the nursery looking at a sleeping Ariel with an expression of worry and uncertainty. Don't let her get to you, I told Rowena. You're a wonderful mother, and Ariel is the perfect baby. I know, Mom, Rowena answered, but her voice sounded unsure. It's just that sometimes I feel like no matter what I do, it's never going to be good enough for her. Elijah, sandwiched between the two women he loved, mother and wife, tried to smooth things over, but I could see that it was getting harder and harder. He adored his daughter, spent every spare moment with her. When he held Ariel, his face transformed, softer, younger. But when his mother began her comparisons, he shrank back, unable to confront her openly. By 3 months, Ariel had grown into a charming, smiling child with dimples on her cheeks and dark blue eyes. Her hair remained dark, with a slight reddish tint in certain lights. She looked like Rowena as a baby, but with features that reminded me of my father's high cheekbones, the shape of his eyebrows. She's a Thornton, I said proudly, using my maiden name. Nothing like the Huddlestons, Beatrice echoed, but it sounded like an accusation. One day when I went to see Rowena, I found her crying in the kitchen. Ariel was asleep in her crib, and my daughter was sitting at the table, clutching a cup of long cold tea. What's wrong? I asked, sitting down next to her and taking her hand. Rowena shook her head, trying to hold back tears. Beatrice was here this morning. She had brought old photo albums to show me what all the Huddleston children looked like. For comparison, she said. I felt a familiar wave of irritation rising inside. E? She spent nearly an hour showing me pictures of blonde-haired, blue-eyed children. And then she said, strange, don't you think? All the Huddlestons as one, and suddenly such an aberration. I squeezed my daughter's hand tighter. She's implying? She's not just insinuating, Mother. She's practically accusing me of infidelity, as if Ariel can't be Elijah's daughter just because she doesn't look like his relatives. I took a deep breath, trying to control my anger. What did Elijah say? He wasn't at home. He's at a science conference in Baltimore until tomorrow. Rowena wiped away her tears. I don't know if I should tell him. He's already torn between us all the time. Honey, I chose my words carefully. Maybe it's time Elijah set clearer boundaries for his mother. What she's doing isn't just tactlessness. It seems like a deliberate attempt to undermine your family. Rowena nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. Elijah was a kind man, a loving husband and father, but standing up to his overbearing mother required a core I feared he didn't have. The problem reached a new point of tension when Ariel was 5 months old, and it was time to plan her baptism. Beatrice, as usual, took the initiative. I've already spoken to Reverend Caldwell, she announced during Sunday lunch. He has agreed to hold the baptism on the third Sunday of next month. I think we'll have a reception at my house after the ceremony. Nothing extravagant, just for close friends and family. Let's say 30 or 40 people. Rowena and Elijah exchanged glances. Mom, Elijah began cautiously. We were thinking of something a little more private. Maybe just family and a couple of close friends. Beatrice put down her fork and looked at her son with an expression that was a mixture of surprise and annoyance. Elijah, the baptism of the first child is a momentous occasion. The Huddleston family has a certain standing in this town. People expect us to celebrate it properly. But this is our child, Rowena interjected, and I was proud to note the firmness in her voice. and we'd like to decide how to celebrate it ourselves. Beatrice turned to my daughter, and something cold flashed in her gaze. Of course, darling. I'm just trying to help. You have so much on your plate with the baby. I thought it would be easier if I took care of the arrangements. Thank you, but we can manage, Rowena replied. We would like to have a small reception at our house after the ceremony. Mother will help with the arrangements. Beatrice gave me a quick glance that showed her displeasure. I kept my expression neutral, though I applauded Rowena inwardly. If you say so, Beatrice said after a pause, but her tone made it clear that the conversation was not over. In the weeks that followed, the preparations for the baptism became a quiet battlefield. Beatrice kept intervening, suggesting her options for the menu, the decorations, the guest list. Every decision Rowena made was criticized, every idea questioned, and all this amidst continued comments about how atypical Ariel looked for a child of the Huddleston family. I tried to support my daughter without adding to the conflict, helping with preparations, keeping an eye on Ariel to give Rowena a break. But with each passing day, I could feel my anxiety growing. Something about Beatrice's behavior alarmed me beyond my mother-in-law's usual nagging. A week before the baptism, Rowena and I sat on the veranda of her house, enjoying a rare moment of peace. Ariel was asleep inside. Elijah was checking test papers in his office. Do you think she'll ever accept Ariel? Rowena asked quietly, looking at the sunset. Or will she always look at her as I don't know, like a mistake? I took my daughter's hand. Beatrice just needs time to adjust, I said, not believing my own words. When Ariel gets older, when her personality starts to emerge more clearly. Mom, Rowena interrupted me. You don't believe it. I see the way she looks at my daughter, like she's looking for something and can't find it, or worse, finding something she doesn't like. I couldn't argue. Beatrice was indeed looking at Ariel with a strange, appraising gaze, not the kind of gaze that grandmothers give their grandchildren. What does Elijah say? Rowena sighed. He says his mother is just old-fashioned and has her own ideas about family, that she loves Ariel in her own way. And do you believe that? I don't know what to believe, Mom. All I know is that I don't want my daughter to grow up feeling that she is somehow wrong or not good enough for her grandmother. We were silent for a moment, watching the last rays of sunlight color the sky in shades of pink and gold. You know, I finally said, sometimes people get so caught up in their ideas of how things should be that they can't accept reality. That's their problem, not yours, and certainly not Ariel's. Rowena nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. And frankly, I shared it. The night before the baptism, I couldn't sleep for a long time. Anxious thoughts swirled in my head. I remembered all of Beatrice's strange comments, her cold stares, her insistence on emphasizing Ariel's differentness from the Huddleston family. There was something pathological, almost obsessive in her behavior. On the morning of the ceremony, I chose my best dress, a navy blue one with a small jacket. I stared at Oswald's picture on the dresser for a long time. I wish you were here, I whispered. You would have known what to do. On the way to the church, I had a strange premonition. Something told me that today would change everything. I tried to push it away, to put it down to the usual anxiety of an old woman, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I parked the car in front of a small Episcopal church built in colonial times. Guests were already gathering on the steps, mostly friends and colleagues of Elijah and Rowena, a few neighbors, and of course, representatives of Chincoteague's high society, invited by Beatrice against the wishes of her parents. Beatrice stood at the entrance, dressed in an immaculate cream suit with a string of pearls around her neck, greeting her guests with a professional smile. When she saw me, the smile became strained for a moment, but quickly returned. Delilah, she nodded. What a lovely day for a baptism. Indeed, I agreed, deciding not to start the day with a confrontation. Inside the church, Rowena and Elijah were waiting with Ariel, dressed in the simple white dress they'd chosen over the Huddlestons' antique christening shirt, causing Beatrice a new wave of displeasure. The baby looked adorable, with a bow in her dark hair and wide-open, curious eyes. The ceremony went off without incident, though I noticed that when Reverend Caldwell asked who the godparents would be, Beatrice visibly tensed. The young couple had chosen Rowena's best friend and Elijah's brother, rather than any of the suitable candidates suggested by Beatrice. After the service, everyone headed to Rowena and Elijah's house for a small reception. The house was beautifully decorated, nothing fancy, just bouquets of fresh wildflowers, white ribbons, and balloons. The table was bursting with treats that Rowena and I had prepared all day yesterday. The mood was festive. The guests congratulated the young parents, admired Ariel. Only Beatrice kept to herself, with a glass of champagne that she barely tasted, watching with an unreadable expression on her face. I noticed that she hardly came near Ariel, didn't ask to hold her like the other guests did. When it was time for dinner, everyone was seated at the large table in the living room. Ariel, tired from the attention and impressions, began to get cranky. Rowena tried to soothe her, but to no avail. Maybe she needs to be fed, I suggested. I think so, Rowena agreed, getting up from the table with the baby in her arms. Rowena, dear, Beatrice intervened. Could you do it somewhere else? It might be awkward for some of the guests. Rowena froze, clearly hurt by the remark. I was going to go to the nursery, Beatrice, she said coldly and left the room. I caught Elijah's gaze, silently urging him to do something about his mother's tactlessness, but he smiled awkwardly and changed the subject. The tension was building. I could feel it, like an impending storm. And somehow I knew that the family dinner after the baptism was just the beginning, that the worst was yet to come. Beatrice Huddleston's house always reminded me of a museum-perfect antique furniture, old paintings in heavy frames, display cases of porcelain figurines that couldn't be touched. The air in here seemed stale, soaked with the smell of furniture polish and dried roses. Even the light filtering through the heavy drapes looked dull and lifeless. I walked reluctantly up the marble steps of the front door, clutching a small box of homemade cookies, my contribution to dinner, even though I knew Beatrice probably wouldn't even serve them. Rowena and Elijah and Ariel had to come directly from their home. Strangely enough, it was Beatrice who had insisted on this family dinner to celebrate Ariel's baptism. After the chilly atmosphere at the baptism itself, I expected her to prefer to distance herself, but instead she organized an intimate family dinner to celebrate properly. The door was opened by the hostess herself, dressed in a dark green dress that emphasized her still slim figure. Her hair was impeccably styled, her makeup discreet but perfect. At 62, Beatrice was still a beautiful woman, though the years and the bitterness she seemed to have cultivated had left their mark. The thin lines around her eyes that no amount of makeup could hide, the hard crease at the corner of her lips. Delilah, she greeted me with that peculiar intonation that always sounded like condescension. You're punctual as always. Hello, Beatrice. I handed her a box of cookies. I baked oatmeal cookies with chocolate. Rowena said Elijah liked them. Beatrice took the box with her fingertips, as if she was afraid of getting dirty. How nice of you. Come on in. I'm just finishing setting up. I entered a spacious hall hung with portraits of the Huddleston ancestors. Rugged men and women in period clothing looked at me with judgment, as if they sensed I didn't belong. Beatrice led me into the drawing room, where a table for 5 had already been set. The silver was polished to a high shine, the china apparently from a family set passed down through the generations. The floral arrangement in the center of the table looked as if it had been put together by a professional florist. Very beautiful, I said politely. I'm a traditionalist, Beatrice replied. Our family has always paid due attention to such things. The implication was clear. Unlike your family, I ignored the stiletto, determined not to start the evening with conflict. Is there anything I can do to help? There's no need. Beatrice faintly winked. I've made all the arrangements. Have a seat. Rowena and Elijah should be here any minute. I sat down in the chair by the window, feeling out of place in this immaculate setting. Beatrice went into the kitchen, leaving me alone with the portraits of the dead Huddlestons. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang, and soon I heard Rowena and Elijah's voices. They entered the living room, Rowena with Ariel in her arms, Elijah carrying a bag for the children's things and a small gift for his mother. Ariel was dressed in an adorable yellow dress, her dark hair adorned with a tiny bow. At 6 months old, she looked even more like a mix between Rowena and my father, the same high cheekbones, the same slit of her eyes. I reached up to hug my daughter and take my granddaughter in my arms, who babbled happily when she saw me. "Hello, little princess," I murmured, kissing her chubby cheek. Beatrice returned with a bottle of wine and glasses on a tray. "Ah, here are the happy parents," she said with a smile that didn't affect her eyes. "Elijah, dear, help me pour the wine." While Elijah helped his mother, Rowena leaned toward me and whispered, "She's in a particularly high spirits today." All the way here, I had a feeling something was wrong. "Just stay alert," I said quietly, "and remember that we can leave at any time." Dinner began relatively peacefully. Beatrice served roast duck with oranges, wild rice, and vegetables, all impeccably cooked and beautifully presented. The conversation revolved around neutral topics: the weather, the latest city news, Elijah's plans for the new school year. Ariel sat in a portable cradle next to the table, making occasional quiet noises, but generally behaving surprisingly calmly for a child her age. "So," Beatrice said as we moved on to dessert, a delicious apple tart of her own making, "I finally decided to go through some old family albums, found some absolutely adorable pictures of Elijah at Ariel's age." She went upstairs and came back with a thick leather-bound photo album. "Here, look at this." She opened the album to a pre-marked page and placed it on the table for all to see. The yellowed photograph showed a little blonde-haired boy with blue eyes and a shy smile. "Look at the little angel." Beatrice gently ran her finger over the picture. Everyone said he was the most beautiful child they had ever seen. Inherited the Huddlestons' best features. I noticed Rowena tense up beside me. Elijah looked slightly embarrassed. "Mother," he said softly, "all children are beautiful in their own way." "Of course, darling," Beatrice agreed with obvious insincerity. "I just thought it would be interesting to trace the family resemblance. Or lack thereof," she added, glancing at Ariel. I felt a wave of irritation rising inside me, but I held it back. Rowena turned pale, her hand holding the fork trembling slightly. "Genetics is an amazing thing," Beatrice continued, turning the pages of the album. "Look, all the children in the Huddleston family for 5 generations have been blonde-haired, blue-eyed, with a certain oval face. These traits are very consistent in our bloodline." D's. "Beatrice," I interjected, "dominant and recessive genes work differently. Ariel's dark hair and eyes could have come from many ancestors." "Oh, I understand how genetics work, Delilah." Beatrice cut her off. "I have a college degree, unlike some people, and I know that dark hair hasn't been in our family for over 200 years. Elijah looked increasingly uncomfortable, but didn't say a word. Rowena sat straight as a string, her face frozen in an expression of polite interest, but I could see the storm of emotion in her eyes. Maybe Rowena's genes were stronger in this generation, Elijah suggested, finally entering the conversation. Maybe, Beatrice said, closing the album. It's statistically unlikely, though, given our family's history. At that moment, Ariel began to whimper. Rowena reached up to take her in her arms. I think she's hungry, my daughter said with a strained smile. Excuse me, I'll feed her in the other room. Use the guest bedroom upstairs, Beatrice said. It will be more comfortable there. When Rowena and the baby came out, the atmosphere at the table became even more tense. Elijah squirmed uncomfortably in his chair. Mom, this dessert is delicious. He tried to change the subject. Thank you, dear. Beatrice smiled at him, but almost immediately her face turned serious again. Elijah, I wanted to talk to you about the situation. What situation? Elijah frowned. Beatrice lowered her voice, even though Rowena wasn't in the room. Dash. You can see that something is wrong. That child? He's nothing like you. I gasped with indignation. Beatrice, what are you talking about? She ignored me, continuing to stare at her son. I've been silent for too long, Elijah, but as your mother, I must open your eyes. Have you never wondered why the child is quite unlike Huddleston? Why, after so many years of infertility, Rowena suddenly became pregnant? Elijah turned pale, his hands clenched into fists. Mom, stop. Now. I can't be silent when I see you being deceived. Beatrice's voice became hysterical. Face it, Elijah. That child can't be yours. I jumped out of my seat. This is out of line. Rowena has never cheated on Elijah. She loves him with all her heart. How would you know? Beatrice snapped at me. You will protect your daughter no matter what she does. At that moment, Rowena came back into the room with Ariel in her arms. She froze in the doorway, obviously sensing the tension. What's going on? She asked, shifting her gaze from me to Elijah and Beatrice. Beatrice turned to her, and I saw something in her eyes that could only be described as pure hatred. We were talking about something that's obvious to everyone but my son, she hissed. That the child you claim to be his daughter has nothing to do with him. Rowena turned so pale that I feared she would faint. She instinctively clutched Ariel tighter to her chest. How, how, how can you say such a thing? Her voice shook. I'm telling the truth that everyone sees but is afraid to say out loud. Beatrice raised her voice. Look at that child. Not one trait of the Huddlestons, not one. Elijah stood up, his face red with anger. Mother, I beg you to stop. Now. But Beatrice seemed unable to stop any longer. Years of pent-up resentment toward my daughter, months of repressed disappointment about my granddaughter. It was all coming out. I knew she wasn't good enough for you from the beginning, she shouted, pointing at Rowena, the daughter of a veterinarian from nowhere. But I tried to accept her for you, Elijah. I kept quiet when she couldn't give you a child for years. And what did we end up with? This, garbage. The room seemed to freeze. The word garbage hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Ariel, frightened by the screams, began to cry. Rowena, still pale as a sheet, swayed but steadied herself. I am sure it is not from my son, Beatrice continued, ignoring the child's cries. You have deceived him, trapped him with this child by another man. Rowena, without a word, turned and left the room. A few seconds later, we heard her coming up the stairs, apparently to gather the baby's things. Elijah stood motionless, as if struck by thunder. His face was such a mixture of shock, pain, and anger that I was afraid for him. How could you? He finally said. turning to his mother. How could you say that about my daughter? I have told the truth which you refuse to see. Beatrice would not give up. This woman is deceiving you, and you are too blind to notice. I watched the scene and felt something dark and dangerous rise up inside me. Anger that I had been holding back for years. Anger for all the petty humiliations, for all the condescending looks, for all the unsolicited advice and criticism. But most of all, anger that this woman dared to call my granddaughter, the blood of my blood, trash. And suddenly I remembered. A memory I had buried years ago suddenly surfaced with surprising clarity. A conversation overheard by chance at the veterinary clinic years ago when Beatrice didn't know I was in the next room. Elijah. I said his name calmly, even though everything inside me was boiling. Go to Rowena. She needs you right now. I'll handle this. He looked at me doubtfully, but something in my face must have convinced him. He nodded and quickly left the room. I was left alone with Beatrice, who looked at me with defiance and contempt. Well, Delilah, now you see who your daughter really is. Or are you going to continue this ridiculous game? I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts and strength. You know, Beatrice, I've wondered for a long time why you hate my daughter so much, why you've been against this marriage from the beginning. I thought it was your social status, your snobbery, but now I see that it's much deeper and darker than that. Beatrice frowned, her confidence shaking slightly. What are you talking about? I'm talking about knowing your secret, Beatrice. My voice was quiet but firm. The one you've been trying so desperately to hide all these years. She turned pale, but quickly pulled herself together. I don't know what you mean. I don't have any secrets. Really? I took a step toward her. What about what happened in the summer of 1993? When you came to our clinic with a sick dog and then had a long talk with my husband behind closed doors? Beatrice froze, her eyes widening. It it was confidential, she whispered. Yes, it was. And Oswald never broke doctor-patient confidentiality, but I overheard your conversation by accident. I was in the next room preparing instruments. I saw her face begin to change, the mask of arrogance slipping away, revealing fear. I heard you crying, Beatrice, begging him not to tell anyone. How you told me that your husband, William Huddleston, was unable to have children because of an illness he suffered in his youth, and how you solved the problem. Shut up. Her voice was barely audible. You got pregnant by another man, Beatrice, the gardener who worked on your estate that summer, a swarthy, dark-haired immigrant from Spain whose name you didn't even bother to remember. Beatrice staggered back and grabbed the back of her chair. Where did you? You told Oswald because you were afraid the child might have hereditary diseases you didn't know about. You wanted him to counsel you on whether there might be something in that man's genes that would harm your future child. Beatrice sank back in her chair, her face dead pale. You said William must never find out, that it would ruin your family, your reputation. You cried about how hard it had been trying to get pregnant for years, knowing it was impossible, and how desperately you wanted a child, an heir for the Huddleston name. Stop it, Beatrice whispered, but I couldn't stop myself. And then Elijah was born, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy who happened to look just like the Huddlestons. No one ever doubted he was William's son, and you buried your secret so deep that you almost believed your own lies. Beatrice covered her face with her hands, her shoulders trembling. That's why you hate Rowena so much, isn't it? I continued. Not because she's not good enough for your son. It's because you're afraid she'll somehow reveal your secret, that the genes you've been trying so hard to hide will show up in her child. I paused, trying to control my emotions. And now you dare accuse my daughter of infidelity? Call my granddaughter trash? You, whose only son was conceived in deceit? Beatrice raised her eyes to me, full of tears and rage. You don't understand anything, she hissed. I did what I had to do, for my family, for my name. No, Beatrice, I shook my head. You did it for yourself, out of fear, out of selfishness. And now you're willing to destroy your son's happiness out of that same fear. At that moment, Rowena and Elijah appeared in the doorway. Rowena was holding a bag of baby things. Elijah was carrying Ariel. Their faces expressed determination mixed with pain. We're leaving, Elijah said briefly, turning to his mother, and I don't know when or if I'll ever want to come back. Beatrice stood up, her face contorted in pleading. Elijah, please, don't you understand? No, mother, he interrupted her. You don't understand. You called my daughter trash. You accused my wife of adultery without a shred of evidence, just because the child doesn't look like your idea of what a Huddleston heiress should look like. Beatrice gave me a panicked look. I could see the fear in her eyes that I would reveal her secret to her son right now. Elijah, your mother and I just had a very important conversation, I said calmly. A conversation I thought you and Rowena should hear. But not right now. Right now you need to take Ariel home, calm her down, and Beatrice and I will finish our conversation. Elijah frowned, clearly not understanding what was going on. But Rowena took his hand gently. Mama's right. We need to get Ariel out of here. They walked out without saying goodbye. I heard the front door close, the engine of their car start. It was just me and Beatrice in her perfectly furnished dining room, amidst half-eaten dessert and shattered illusions. What are you going to do? She asked after a long silence. Her voice sounded lifeless. I looked at her, this woman who had despised me and my daughter for years, who had just called my granddaughter trash, who was willing to destroy her own son's family to preserve her lies. I'm going to go to my daughter and granddaughter, I replied. And what happens next, Beatrice, is up to you. Returning home after that horrible scene at Beatrice's house, I couldn't get rid of the image of her face, frozen in a mask of shock and fear, as I spoke aloud the secret she had so carefully hidden for nearly 4 decades. I had never planned to use that knowledge as a weapon. I had kept the secret all these years, believing it was none of my business, that it was a secret between Beatrice and her late husband. But when she insulted my granddaughter, when I saw the pain in my daughter's eyes, something broke inside me. The limits I had set for myself crumbled under the weight of a mother's rage. It was dark when I pulled up to Rowena and Elijah's house. There was a dim light in the windows. I knocked and entered without waiting for an answer, knowing they were waiting for me. Rowena was sitting on the couch, cradling a sleeping Ariel against her. Her eyes were red from crying, but her face maintained a determined expression. Elijah paced nervously around the room, stopping every now and then to glance at his wife and daughter, as if he wanted to make sure they were still here. Mom, Rowena looked up at me. What happened after we left? I took off my coat and sat down beside her, gently touching Ariel's cheek with my fingertips. Nothing to worry about right now, I replied. The important thing is that you're all safe here. Elijah stopped in front of us, his usually kind face contorted with an anger I'd never seen before. I never thought my mother capable of such cruelty. His voice shook. To call my daughter such a word, blaming Rowena. Elijah, I looked him straight in the eye. I think you both need to pack your things and stay with me tonight. I'm not sure you should stay here right now. Why not? He frowned. Do you think my mother might come here? I shook my head. No, I don't think so. But you need a respite, neutral territory, and I want to be there for you tonight. Rowena and Elijah exchanged glances. the kind of silent communication that couples who'd been together for years would have. Good, Rowena finally nodded. You're right, Mother. I'm not sure I can sleep here tonight. While they were packing, I held Ariel in my arms, who, thankfully, was sleeping soundly, unaware of the storm brewing around her. Looking at her serene face, I felt a strange mixture of tenderness and rage. How could someone call this beautiful creature trash? How could a grandmother reject her grandchild because of the color of her hair and the shape of her eyes? Half an hour later, we were at my house. I placed Ariel in an old crib I'd kept in the attic since my own children were grown. Elijah and Rowena settled into Silas's room. Finally, when everyone had calmed down, we gathered in the kitchen. I made tea, an old tried and true way to create some semblance of normalcy in an abnormal situation. Now tell us what happened to Beatrice after we left, Elijah asked, wrapping his hands around the mug of tea. What was that important conversation you mentioned? I took a deep breath. The moment of truth had arrived, and I wasn't sure how best to proceed. Did I have the right to reveal Beatrice's secret to her son? Wouldn't I further traumatize an already shaken family? It's complicated, I began cautiously. What I know about your mother, Elijah, I learned by accident years ago, and until today, I'd never used that knowledge. But today you did, Rowena said quietly. I saw the look on Beatrice's face when we left. She looked destroyed. Yes, I admitted. Today, I reminded her of the secret she's been hiding your whole life, Elijah. He tensed, his hands clenched around the mug. What secret? I looked into his eyes, the eyes the color of a summer sky, so similar to Beatrice's and so unlike the swarthy Spanish gardener she'd talked to my husband about years ago. I'm not sure I have the right to tell you this, I admitted honestly. It's your mother's personal story, and perhaps it's up to her to decide if she wants to share it with you. Elijah leaned back in his chair, his face hard. After what she said about my daughter, after she accused my wife of cheating on me, do you really think she deserves that kind of protection? I could see the anger and pain struggling in him. The man sitting in front of me wasn't just a kind teacher and a caring father. There was a strength in him that I hadn't noticed before. It's not about whether she deserves protection, I said softly. The point is that this secret could change the way you see not only your mother, but yourself. And I'm not sure now, when you're so angry, is the right time. Rowena put her hand on Elijah's shoulder. Mom's right. We're all too emotional right now. Maybe we should wait until the storm subsides a little. Elijah pressed his lips together, but after a moment of internal conflict, he nodded. Okay, but at least tell me one thing. Does what you know explain her behavior? Her hatred for Ariel? I nodded slowly. Yes, it did, but it doesn't excuse it. We sat in silence, broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Finally, Elijah stood up. I need to get some air. I'm going for a walk around the block. When the door closed behind him, Rowena sighed. He's never seen his mother like this, she said quietly. It's a double blow to him, both what she said and the fact that he couldn't stop her. He loves his mother, I remarked. It's natural, but he loves you and Ariel too, and today he made a choice. Rowena rubbed her eyes, which were filled with unshed tears. You know, Mother, all these years I've tried to understand why Beatrice hates me so much. Thought maybe I didn't try hard enough, didn't respect their traditions enough. But now, I reached out and squeezed her palm. It was never your fault, sweetheart. Beatrice is at war with her own demons, and you were just in the line of fire. But Ariel, Rowena's voice trembled. She's an innocent child. How could Beatrice name her? Ariel is a threat to her, I explained. Not in and of herself, of course, but because she doesn't look like what Beatrice considers The real Huddleston. Rowena frowned, trying to understand. But that was just genetics. Children don't always look like their parents. It's more complicated than that, I sighed. Maybe someday you'll know the whole story. But for now, it's important for you to know that you're a wonderful mother. Ariel is a wonderful baby, and you and Elijah are wonderful parents. None of what Beatrice said has anything to do with reality. At that moment, Ariel's cries came from upstairs. Rowena stood up. I'll go to her. Left alone, I went to the window. It was dark outside. Only the streetlights illuminated the deserted street. Elijah was out there somewhere, trying to make sense of what had happened, trying to find a new footing in a world that had shaken beneath his feet. I thought about Beatrice, about what she must be feeling right now. Fear, anger, despair, regret. I had no sympathy for her, not after what she had said about my granddaughter. But I knew there was fear behind her cruelty. Fear that the carefully constructed lies on which she had built her life might crumble, and now that I had spoken that lie out loud, even if only in her presence, she must feel cornered. I went back to the table and started to put the cups away when I heard the front door open. Elijah was back sooner than I expected. He walked into the kitchen with a determined look on his face. Delilah, he began without preamble, I want to know the truth, the whole truth. I looked at him carefully. The anger in his eyes was replaced by a hard determination. Are you sure? He nodded. Yes. Whatever it is, I have to know. For Rowena's sake, for Ariel's sake, and for my own sake. I gestured for him to sit down and returned to my seat. Taking a deep breath, I began to tell a story I'd overheard at the veterinary clinic many years ago. Your father, William Huddleston, couldn't have children, I said bluntly, a consequence of mumps contracted in his youth. Beatrice had known about it from the beginning of their marriage, but kept it from everyone, including her own parents. The Huddleston family had a strong tradition of succession, of continuing the family line. The pressure on the young couple was immense, especially Beatrice as the daughter-in-law who had entered the family. Elijah sat motionless, his face expressionless. The years went by, and still no children. People began to talk, to look with pity. Beatrice felt her position in the family, and society was threatened. And then she, made a decision. She cheated on her father, Elijah said quietly. It wasn't a question, but a statement. I nodded. In the summer of 1983, a young gardener, an immigrant from Spain, worked at Huddleston Manor. Beatrice never gave his name. I don't know whether there were real feelings between them or whether it was just a practical choice, but she got pregnant, and she gave the child away as her husband's son. Me, Elijah said almost silently. Yes, I confirmed, you. He sat there, staring into the void in front of him. I couldn't imagine what was going through his mind at that moment. To find out at 38 that the man you'd spent your whole life thinking was your father wasn't really your biological parent, that your mother had been hiding the truth your whole life. I almost regretted telling him. Why didn't you ever talk about this before? He finally asked. It wasn't my secret, Elijah, I answered honestly. I found out about it by accident when Beatrice came to Oswald for advice. She was worried about possible hereditary diseases, which she knew nothing about because she had no information about the man's family. My husband was not only a veterinarian, but also had a good knowledge of genetics. Beatrice trusted him and knew he would keep a professional secret. And did he? Yes. He never talked about it, not even to me. But I was in the next room and I overheard them talking. Oswald didn't know about it, and Beatrice must have forgotten that I might have been in the clinic. Elijah ran his hand over his face. So that's why she's reacting so strangely to Ariel, because she's afraid that she's going to show the traits that you have in you but haven't shown on the outside. I finished. Yes, that's right. You inherited your mother's hair and eye color, which was a great stroke of luck for her. No one ever doubted that you were William Huddleston's son. But Ariel? She probably had the genes of that man, your biological father. That's why she insisted that Ariel didn't look like the real Huddleston, Elijah muttered. Because I myself don't. You're a Huddleston, I said firmly. William raised you as his son. As far as I can tell, he never knew the truth. He loved you unconditionally. That's what makes a man a father, not biology. Elijah looked up at me, his eyes deep in pain. I've spent my life trying to be worthy of his name, his legacy, and now I find out I was never a part of that legacy. You're wrong, I said softly. You were and still are a Huddleston. But Beatrice, she had sunk so deeply into her lies that she might have begun to believe them herself. And when Ariel appeared, when she saw in her the features that would give away her secret, she panicked, Elijah finished. She decided it was easier to accuse Rowena of infidelity than to admit her own. We sat in silence, contemplating the gravity of the situation. Finally, Elijah stood up. Thank you for telling me the truth, Delilah. I should have known. What are you going to do? I asked. He shrugged, and in that gesture, I saw a new resolve. I'm going to talk to Rowena first. She has to know. And then, he paused. Then I'll talk to my mother. Don't make any rash decisions, I advised. Give yourself time to think about it. Elijah nodded and headed for the stairs leading to the second floor, where Rowena and Ariel's room was. I stayed in the kitchen, feeling strangely empty after the conversation. I felt no triumph or satisfaction at having revealed Beatrice's secret, only the weight of knowing that my words had changed Elijah's life forever. I sat alone for about an hour, listening to the muffled voices upstairs. Finally, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Rowena and Elijah came down together, holding hands. Their faces were tired, but I could see the calm determination in their eyes. We talked, Rowena said, sitting down across from me. Elijah told me everything. I shifted my gaze to Elijah. How are you? He smiled weakly, shocked, confused, angry, but in a strange way, a lot of things fell into place. Why Mother had always been so controlling, why she clung so desperately to the traditions of the Huddleston family as if to prove she belonged. Why she never allowed me even a small rebellion against what it means to be a Huddleston. What have you decided to do next? I asked. They exchanged glances, and Rowena nodded, letting her husband speak. I called my mother, Elijah said. I told her I knew the truth, that we needed to talk, but not now. I need time to process things, and she needs to decide if she wants to be a part of her granddaughter's life, accepting her for who she is, or continue to live in fear of the truth. How did she react? I asked, surprised by his determination. She cried, he answered simply. She apologized, begged me not to turn my back on her. But I told her that my family was the most important thing to me right now, Rowena and Ariel, and that her insults to them were unacceptable for whatever reason. I felt a sudden pride in this man who had always seemed too soft, too malleable to the influence of his overbearing mother. Today he showed a core that I hadn't expected in him. We've decided that we'll stay here with you for now, Mother, Rowena added, for a few days until we decide what to do next. You can stay as long as you need to, I assured them. My house is your home. Elijah walked to the window, staring out into the darkness of the night. You know, Delilah, he said without turning around, all my life I've tried to live up to my mother's expectations, to be worthy of the Huddleston name. I've let her interfere with my decisions, dictate how I should live my life. And even when I married Rowena, I couldn't fully protect her from my mother's nagging. He turned toward us, and in his eyes I saw a strange mixture of sadness and release. But something was different today. When I heard her name my daughter, something broke inside of me. And now, knowing the truth about my own origins, I feel as if the chains that have bound me all my life have finally been broken. Rowena stood up and walked over to him, putting her arm around his shoulders. "You were always stronger than you thought," she said quietly. "And your mother knew it. Maybe that's why she was so afraid of losing control of you." I watched them, my daughter and her husband, two people united by love and now strengthened by a common challenge, and felt that, despite the pain of today, perhaps it was necessary. Necessary to throw off the masks, to break down the walls of lies, and begin to build something new, based on truth. Ariel, sleeping upstairs, will never know the storm that blew up on the day of her baptism. But perhaps because of that storm, she will grow up in a family free from the shadow of secrets and lies that haunted previous generations. That night, as I fell asleep in my bed, I thought of Beatrice, of a woman who lived her life in fear of exposure, in constant worry that her carefully constructed facade would crumble, and how that fear had poisoned her relationship with her own son, with his wife, with her granddaughter. I felt no hatred for her, only regret that she had chosen lies over truth, control over acceptance, fear over love. Chincoteague has always been a town where news travels faster than a sea breeze. By the end of the week after a scandal at a family dinner, I began to notice changes in the behavior of people I'd known for decades. Walking past Brown's Pharmacy, where I usually stopped to chat with Mrs. Brown, I was met with only a cold nod. At the grocery store, conversations died down when I appeared in the aisle. And when I stopped for coffee at Margie's Cafe, where the local ladies my age gathered, Edith Campbell, Beatrice's longtime friend, sat at the next table, her gaze literally burning a hole in me. Beatrice had launched her campaign. I should have expected it. A woman with her social connections and reputation couldn't just accept being exposed and losing control of her son. She used the only weapon she had left: influence in the Chincoteague community. On Thursday, 10 days after the scandal, I was standing in line at the bank when I heard a muffled conversation behind me. "Did you hear what that Thornton woman is saying about Beatrice Huddleston?" Whispered Mirabelle Finch, the owner of the flower store. "Such filthy gossip, and without a shred of proof." "No wonder," replied Dorothy Welch, wife of the town treasurer. She had always envied Beatrice's position, and now that her daughter couldn't keep her husband, I turned sharply, unable to restrain myself. "Good afternoon, ladies," I said with a strained smile. "If you're going to discuss me and my family, maybe you should do it behind my back." Both women blushed, but Mirabelle recovered quickly. "Delilah," she said with feigned sympathy, "we're just worried. Beatrice is so upset. They say Elijah moved away from her, taking his wife and child. Is that true?" I felt anger boiling up inside, but years of practice in containing my emotions helped me keep my composure. "Mirabelle, I appreciate your concern, but what happens in my daughter's family is their own business. And if you've heard some dirty gossip, perhaps you should inquire as to its source." Dorothy pressed her lips together. "Beatrice Huddleston has been a respected member of our community for many decades. Her version of events is credible." "And mine isn't?" I asked calmly. "After 45 years of living in Chincoteague and serving this town?" Both women exchanged awkward glances, but remained silent. I turned my back, signaling that the conversation was over. My insides were trembling with restrained emotion. So Beatrice was spreading her version of events, and by the looks of it, in that version, Rowena and I were the villains who had destroyed her happy family. When I returned home, I found Rowena on the veranda with Ariel in her arms. My daughter looked distressed. "What's wrong?" I asked, taking a seat next to her. Rowena sighed. "I took Ariel for a routine checkup with Dr. Higgins, and he was strangely cold, asking questions about Elijah's family medical history as if he suspected me of lying. And then, in the hallway, I ran into Mrs. Prescott, the principal of the school where Elijah works. She looked at me as if I were some kind of—" Rowena stopped talking, not wanting to say the word in front of the child. I put my hand on her shoulder. "Beatrice is spreading rumors," I said. "I ran into it today, too." "What is she saying?" "Apparently, she's insinuating that you cheated on Elijah and that you and I slandered her to cover it up." I shook my head. "Typical tactic. The best defense is offense." Rowena pulled Ariel closer to her. "How could she? After everything she'd said about our daughter, after the truth about herself came out, she's desperate," I explained. "Her whole life has been built on a certain image, on social esteem. And now that that image is threatened, she's going to fight back in any way she can." "Elijah will be furious when he finds out," Rowena said quietly. And indeed, when Elijah returned from work and heard what was happening, his face darkened with anger. "I will talk to her," he said firmly. "This has to stop." "I'm not sure that's a good idea," I objected. "Any contact between the two of you right now would only add fuel to the fire." "But we can't just sit back and let her ruin Rowena's reputation," Elijah argued. "No, we can't," I agreed. "But we need to be smarter than that. Chincoteague is a small town, and people here ultimately value truth more than gossip." The problem escalated the following week when Rowena received a letter from the Church Council of the Episcopal Church where Ariel was baptized. In polite but unambiguous terms, she was informed that her presence at a charity tea party the following Sunday may cause discomfort to some members of the congregation. Rowena has been the organizer of the event for the past 3 years. "This is Beatrice's job," Rowena said, crumpling the letter in her hands. "She heads the church's women's committee. I could see how it hurt my daughter. The church community was an important part of her life, one of the few places where she felt a sense of belonging independent of Beatrice's influence." That same day, I decided to act. I couldn't let Beatrice ruin my daughter's life with impunity. I put on my best dress and light makeup and went to visit Olivia Carson, bookstore owner and Chincoteague's most influential gossip columnist. If anyone could resist Beatrice's influence in spreading the word, it was Olivia. The C-Page bookstore was housed in an old Victorian building on Main Street. The bell above the door jingled melodiously as I entered. Olivia, an elegant woman in her 70s with short gray hair and shrewd eyes, stood behind the counter arranging the new arrivals. "Delilah," she greeted me with slight surprise. What a pleasant surprise. "Hello, Olivia." I approached the counter. "Do you have a moment for an old friend?" Olivia looked at me carefully, as if assessing the situation, then nodded. "Jessie," she said to the young girl who was arranging the books on the shelves, "keep an eye on the store. Mrs. Thornton and I will be in the back room." We went into a small office filled with books and files. Olivia closed the door and gestured for me to sit down. "I've heard different versions of what's going on between your family and the Huddlestons," Olivia said. "And I have to admit, Beatrice's version sounds unconvincing." I was relieved. Olivia was always known for her insight. "I came here to tell you the truth," I said. "Not so you could spread it around town, but so you'd have the whole picture." And I told her everything, the strained relationship between Rowena and Beatrice over the years, the birth of Ariel and Beatrice's strange behavior, the terrible scene at dinner. I didn't mention Beatrice's secret about Elijah's origins, It wasn't my secret to share, but I explained that Beatrice had her own personal reasons for her hostility toward the child that had nothing to do with Rowena's supposed infidelity. Olivia listened attentively, not interrupting. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, pondering what she had heard. I always thought Beatrice Huddleston was a complicated person, she said at last, too fixated on status and appearances. But to call your own granddaughter trash? She shook her head. That's out of line. Exactly, I nodded. And now she's trying to smear my daughter to save her own reputation? Olivia tapped her fingers on the table thoughtfully. You know, Delilah, Beatrice may have influence in certain circles, but there are other powerful people in this town, people who value fairness above social status. I looked at her closely. What are you suggesting? Nothing in particular. Olivia smiled slightly. Just let me talk to some people. Remind them who Delilah Thornton is, the woman who treated their pets for 4 decades, who never refused help even when people couldn't pay, and who Rowena is, the girl who organized book collections for the Children's Hospital, who taught Sunday school, who was always kind and honest. I felt tears coming to my eyes. Thank you, Olivia. Don't thank me too soon, she warned me. Beatrice wouldn't give up easily, but the truth has a way of finding its way into the light. When I left the bookstore, I felt a little lighter. I wasn't alone in this battle. I had allies, even if I didn't know all of them yet. The effects of my conversation with Olivia began to show after a few days. At first, it was little things. A smile from Mrs. Jenkins at the grocery store, a friendly nod from Mr. Foster at the post office. Then, on Friday, something more significant happened. The Reverend Caldwell, pastor of the Episcopal Church, personally called Rowena to apologize for the church council's letter and to assure her presence at the tea party was not only welcome but necessary. He said that some of the council members had been misled, Rowena told me, her eyes shining with relief, and that he had personally reviewed the situation and saw no reason to exclude me from church activities. You see, I hugged her. People are beginning to see through Beatrice's lies, but our small victory was only the beginning of a fiercer battle. On Sunday, when Rowena went to the tea party, Elijah stayed home with Ariel. Beatrice showed up accompanied by 3 of her closest friends. They defiantly left the event as soon as they saw my daughter, with Beatrice loudly declaring that she can't be in the same room with the woman who destroyed her family. Rowena came home in tears. Elijah, seeing his wife's condition, immediately grabbed the car keys. Enough, he said firmly. I'll talk to her now. Rowena and I couldn't stop him. He came back an hour later, pale and determined. I told her that if she didn't stop spreading lies about Rowena, I would publicly tell the truth about my origins, he told us. The whole truth with all the details. You won't do that, Rowena whispered. I will if I have to, Elijah said firmly. I won't let her ruin our lives because of her fears and complexes. How did she react? I asked. At first, she didn't believe I was capable of such a move. Elijah grinned bitterly. Then she started crying, begging. She said it would kill her, destroy everything she'd spent decades building. But I was adamant. She promised to stop spreading rumors. He shrugged. I don't know whether to believe her or not, but I let her know that this was her last chance. I was struck by Elijah's determination. The man who'd always seemed soft and compliant, especially toward his mother, now displayed a steely will when it came to protecting his family. But Elijah's threat didn't seem to stop Beatrice completely. She changed her tactics, which had become more sophisticated. Now, instead of direct accusations, she used innuendo and ambiguity. Poor Elijah. He's so attached to the child, even with all the obvious facts. Or, some people will do anything to preserve their reputation, even slander against respected members of society. The situation became even more complicated when Beatrice's relatives on her late husband's side of the family got involved. William Huddleston's cousin, Henry, called Elijah to express his concern about the family situation. According to Elijah, the conversation was strained, with clear hints that Elijah was betraying the Huddleston family values and that his behavior was casting a shadow on his father's memory. They don't know how ironic that sounds, Elijah said after the call, with a bitter chuckle. Talking to me about betraying Huddleston family values when I don't even. He didn't finish the sentence, but Rowena and I understood. The revelation of the truth about his origins had undermined not only his relationship with his mother, but also his perception of himself, of his identity. All his life he'd considered himself a Huddleston, proud of that heritage, trying to fit in. And now it appeared that it was only a skillfully created illusion. On Wednesday, as the conflict seemed to reach a new peak, the unexpected happened. Silas showed up on my doorstep. My son, who usually only came for Christmas, stood there with a suitcase and a determined expression on his face. Silas! I rushed to hug him. What are you doing here? Rowena called me, he answered, hugging me back. Told me what was going on. I took a week's vacation. I couldn't hold back the tears. My son, who'd always been a little distant, had rushed across the country to support us in our time of need. Silas was quick to pick up on the situation. Unlike Elijah, he had no personal history with Beatrice and could look at the conflict with fresh eyes. After dinner, when Ariel was asleep and we were all sitting in the living room, he gave his opinion. The problem is that you're letting Beatrice control the narrative, he said. She attacks, you defend yourself. She spreads rumors, you try to refute them. But that way, you're always one step behind. And what do you suggest? Elijah asked. Change the rules of the game, Silas answered. Instead of reacting to her actions, start acting on your own. Create your own narrative. How? Rowena asked. Silas thought for a moment. For example, organize a charity event, something that emphasizes your values as a family, your connection to the Chincoteague community. Let people see you together, a happy, strong family, not the way Beatrice tries to portray you. It was a good idea. And the very next day, Rowena began planning a fundraiser for the local animal shelter, a cause close to our family because of my work as a veterinarian. She contacted Olivia Carson, who enthusiastically supported the initiative and offered to host the event at her bookstore. News of the charity event quickly spread around town, and as we had hoped, people began to choose sides not based on rumors, but on action. Many expressed support, some offered to help. Of course, there were those who remained loyal to Beatrice, but they were becoming fewer and fewer. Beatrice reacted predictably. She tried to organize her own charity event on the same day, but this time her influence was not enough. Too many people had already pledged to come to our event, and her action looked like a clear attempt to undermine a good cause. The C page was full of people on the day of the fundraiser. Rowena was beaming as she greeted guests and spoke about the needs of the orphanage. Elijah proudly held Ariel in his arms, who charmed everyone with her smile and dimpled cheeks. Silas was helping with organizing the auction, and I was answering questions about veterinary care for homeless animals. At one point, I noticed Beatrice standing on the opposite side of the street, watching through the storefront window. Her face expressed a complex mix of emotions: anger, envy, loneliness. Our gazes met, and for a moment I thought I saw something like remorse in her eyes. But she quickly turned away and walked away. The event turned out to be a huge success. We raised a significant amount of money for the shelter, and more importantly, people saw us for who we are: a loving family caring for their community. No rumor could counteract that reality. That evening, when Silas and I were alone on the veranda, he asked, "Do you think this is the end?" I shook my head. "I don't think so. Beatrice is not one to give up easily, but we won an important battle today." Silas looked thoughtfully at the stars. "You know, Mom, I always thought our family was, ordinary, unremarkable. But looking at the way you've all handled this situation, I realize we have a strength I hadn't noticed before." I squeezed his hand. "We've always been strong, Silas. It's just that sometimes it takes adversity to make that strength manifest." He smiled, openly, and without a shadow of detachment for the first time in years. "I'm glad I came. Glad I could be a part of it." That night, lying in bed, I pondered the strange turns life takes, how one angry word thrown in anger can set off a chain of events that change many destinies, how secrets hidden for decades have a way of coming to the surface at the most unexpected moment. Beatrice called my granddaughter garbage in an attempt to protect her own secret, and as a result, she lost control of her son, respect in the community, and perhaps a chance for a real relationship with her granddaughter. And we, the family she deemed unworthy of her son, rallied in the face of adversity and became stronger. Sometimes behind every ending is a new beginning. And though I knew that the conflict with Beatrice was not over, that new challenges lay ahead, I felt strangely calm. Whatever the consequences, we would face them together as a family. Life-changing decisions often come unexpectedly. Mine came on a quiet Sunday morning as I sat on the veranda of my house, watching the sun rise over Chincoteague. The town was just waking up. A fairy horn could be heard in the distance. A dog was barking in a neighboring street, and seagulls were circling in the sky. This landscape, these sounds have been part of my life for almost 50 years. This is where I raised my children, buried my husband, built my career, and it's also where I realized it was time to leave. Silas left 2 days ago, but before he left, he talked to me at length about his life in Portland, the green parks and friendly people, the scientific community, and cozy cafes. He described his small house near the university, with a garden where his sons grow vegetables and berries. And in his words, I heard something he didn't say out loud. "There's room for you there, Mom." Rowena and Elijah were still staying with me, though they had already begun to cautiously move back into their home, picking up things, checking the mail. But I could see how hard it was for them to be in a place where every corner reminded them of years of silent patience and trying to live up to Beatrice's expectations. I saw Rowena tense up as she passed her mother-in-law's house. Elijah avoid his usual routes so he wouldn't accidentally bump into his mother. By the time they came down for breakfast, I had already made my decision. "I'm thinking of selling the house," I said, pouring coffee into cups. Rowena froze with a slice of bread in her hand. "What? Why?" "Because it's time for a change," I answered calmly. "I'm thinking about moving to Portland, closer to Silas and his family. It's about time I got to know my grandchildren for real, not just the occasional holiday visit." Elijah and Rowena exchanged glances. "But, Mother," Rowena began, "you always said you would never leave Chincoteague. Your whole life is here, your friends. And many of those friends were not so reliable when times got tough," I said without bitterness, simply stating the fact. "Besides, I'm not getting any younger. Someday I'm going to need help, and I'd rather be with my family than rely on the dubious kindness of my neighbors." Elijah stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "You know, Rowena and I have been thinking about moving too," he said quietly. "Not necessarily to Portland, but somewhere where we could start fresh, where Ariel can grow up without the shadow of all that history." I looked at them carefully. "Are you serious?" Rowena nodded. "We'd discussed this several times in recent weeks. Elijah has been offered a place at a private school in Seattle. It's a good opportunity, and the city isn't that far from Portland. So we're all thinking the same thing. I smiled. Perhaps that's a sign. But your veterinary practice? Rowena began. I sold it 3 years ago, honey, when the arthritis got too bad for day-to-day work. I only do occasional counseling, and that I can do anywhere. I paused. The only thing that keeps me here are the memories, and the most important ones I can take with me. Over the next few days, our decision slowly morphed from a vague idea into a concrete plan. I contacted a realtor who appraised my house and assured me it would sell quickly. Real estate in Chincoteague was always in demand. Elijah officially accepted the offer from Seattle and began the process of transferring the paperwork. Rowena got busy finding a place for them to live and researching daycare centers for Ariel. The news of our impending departure spread through the city with its usual speed, lightning fast. Reactions varied. Some expressed genuine regret, some pretended to be saddened, and some, obviously from Beatrice's camp, struggled to hide their satisfaction. Olivia Carson invited me to tea to express her regret at my departure. Chincoteague will lose one of its souls, she said, pouring tea into thin porcelain cups. But I understand your decision. Sometimes leaving is the only way to maintain your dignity. It's not just that, I replied. I really want to be closer to Silas and his family. Life's too short to waste these years. Olivia nodded understandingly. Still, it's a shame Beatrice got what she wanted. She practically ran you out of town. I shook my head. If that's what she thinks, let her think it. But we're leaving not because we lost, but because there are more important things than old grudges and small-town wars. That's a wise position, Olivia approved. Though I have to say, Beatrice is in a bad place right now. After your charity event, a lot of people started to see her in a different light, especially when it was revealed that she'd tried to interfere with the orphanage fundraiser. You know, people can forgive a lot of things, but pettiness and spite is rare. It was small consolation, but still I felt a slight satisfaction. Not that Beatrice was suffering, but that there was justice, even in such a difficult world. We set a moving date for mid-October, enough time to wrap things up and say goodbye to the people we really wanted to say goodbye to. I started sorting through things, deciding what to take with me and what to keep or give away. It was a strange, almost meditative process, going through the items accumulated over decades and deciding which ones were important enough to accompany me into my new life. Oswald's photographs, of course, will come with me, his old sweater that I sometimes wore on particularly cold nights, family albums, letters, children's drawings of Rowena and Silas, but a lot of other things, furniture, books, kitchen utensils, could have stayed. After all, stuff is just stuff. A week before my scheduled departure, when most of my house was already boxed up and the keys to my new home in Portland were in the mailbox, something happened that I had both expected and hoped to avoid. Beatrice Huddleston showed up on my doorstep. It was late evening. Rowena and Elijah and Ariel had left for Baltimore to go shopping for the new house and didn't plan to return until tomorrow. I was sitting in the living room going through old photographs when I heard a knock on the door. Beatrice looked 10 years older. Her usually immaculate hair was sloppy, and her eyes were tired. She was holding a small box wrapped in plain paper. "Delilah," she said instead of greeting. "May I come in?" I hesitated for a moment, then stepped back, letting her in. "Come in." She entered, looking around, noting the packed boxes and half-empty shelves. "So the rumors weren't lying. You really are leaving." "Yes," I confirmed, pointing to her chair. "All three of us. Elijah got a good offer in Seattle." Beatrice sat down, placing the box on her lap. "So far away." Her voice shook. "The other side of the country." "Cup of tea?" I offered, deciding to maintain a minimum of decorum. She shook her head. No, thank you. I won't be long. I sat down across from her, waiting for her to explain the purpose of her visit. Beatrice tapped her fingers nervously on the box, obviously choosing her words. I've come to talk about the situation, she said at last. About what you know about me, about your secret? I clarified. She flinched as if the word secret hurt her. Yes, I know that Elijah knows the truth now. He told me, and I realize it was you who told him. There was no accusation in her voice, only humility. It wasn't my first choice, I answered honestly. But after you called my granddaughter trash and accused my daughter of infidelity, I have little desire to protect your secrets. Beatrice lowered her eyes. I understand. What I said, it was unforgivable. I was in a panic. When I saw Ariel different from the Huddlestons, I was afraid the truth would come out, that people would start asking questions. And your first reaction was to accuse your sister-in-law of adultery? I couldn't hide the bitterness in my voice. I'm not proud of it, Beatrice said quietly. It was a moment of weakness. Fear had overpowered reason. I looked at the woman in front of me, the once proud, arrogant Beatrice Huddleston, who now looked broken and aged. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction at her fall, but I found myself feeling only fatigue. Why have you come, Beatrice? I asked bluntly. If you're waiting for forgiveness, I'm afraid it's too soon. She shook her head. No, I'm not that naive. I came here to ask. She took a deep breath. I came to ask you not to completely ruin my reputation when you leave. I frowned, not understanding. What do you mean? When you leave, there's nothing to stop you from telling the whole town the truth about me, she explained. That Elijah isn't William's son, that I've been lying to everyone all these years. Her hands trembled. It will destroy me, Delilah. It's all I have left, my name, my position in society. I looked at her in amazement. Do you really think I'm capable of such revenge? Don't you? A spark of the old Beatrice flashed in her eyes. After all that has happened between us? Beatrice, I shook my head. I didn't tell your secret to anyone but Elijah, who had every right to know. Even Olivia Carson, who could have spread the story all over town in a day. I didn't say a word about your secret. She looked surprised. Why? Because, unlike you, I don't think other people's secrets are weapons to be used for my own gain, I answered. And because, despite everything that's happened, I don't want to hurt you any more than you already have. Beatrice stared at me for a long time, as if trying to see if I were telling the truth. I don't believe you, she said at last. No one is that generous. It's not generosity, I objected. It is fatigue. I am 68 years old, Beatrice. I want to spend my remaining years in peace, not war. I want to see my granddaughter grow up, my son teaching geology to students, my daughter and her husband building a new life. I have neither the time nor the desire to waste energy on revenge. She was silent, digesting my words. And yet, I continued, I won't actively defend you if someone starts asking questions. I will not lie for you, Beatrice. Your secrets are no longer my secrets. She nodded slowly. Fair enough, she said after a pause, and handed me the box she'd been holding in her lap the whole time. This is for Ariel. From me. I took the box carefully, not knowing what to expect. What is it? Open it, Beatrice suggested. I unfolded the paper and opened the box. Inside was an antique silver rattle, delicately engraved and obviously valuable. It was my grandmother's, Beatrice explained. Not Huddleston, but from my own family, the Clarks. She passed it down to me when I was about Ariel's age. I picked up the rattle, examining the delicate work. Why? Because no matter what, Ariel is my granddaughter. Beatrice said quietly. Elijah is my son, regardless of biology. I raised him, loved him, lived for him, and though I made an unforgivable mistake, I want something of me to stay with them. That Ariel will someday know that she had a grandmother who finally admitted her mistakes. There was so much sincerity in her words that I felt unexpected sympathy for this woman I'd considered my enemy for so long. I'll tell Ariel, I promised, and I'll tell her about you when she's old enough to understand. Thank you. Beatrice stood up, ready to leave. And Delilah, I'm sorry about a lot of things, almost everything. I'm up too. You know, Beatrice, all is not lost. Elijah is a good man with a good heart. Give him time, and maybe one day he'll find the strength to forgive you. I don't deserve his forgiveness. Beatrice shook her head. But I shall be grateful if it ever comes. She started toward the door, but stopped at the threshold. Goodbye, Delilah. I wish you and your family happiness in your new life. Goodbye, Beatrice, I replied. I hope you, too, find your way to peace. When the door closed behind her, I stood for a long time, holding the silver rattle in my hands and thinking about the strange twists of fate that had brought us all to this moment. About how one lie told out of fear years ago had grown into a whole web of deceit and pain, and about how perhaps only a breakup can bring healing. The day of departure was clear and cool, a perfect October day in Chincoteague. Our belongings were packed and shipped in advance. My house, now nearly empty, already belonged to the new owners, a young couple from Baltimore who planned to use it as a summer residence. Rowena and Elijah's house had been sold too, and for a good price, thanks to the growing interest in waterfront real estate. We stood in the driveway of my now former house, me, Rowena, and Elijah, with Ariel in his arms. A few friends had come to say goodbye: Olivia Carson, Reverend Caldwell, old clients from my veterinary practice. No one from Beatrice's inner circle showed up, which was expected. We'll miss you, Delilah, Olivia said, hugging me. The town won't be the same without you. Likewise, I smiled. But I promised to write and maybe come back sometime in the summer. Last goodbyes, last hugs, last promises to stay in touch. Finally, we got into Elijah's car. He would drive to Baltimore, and from there we would fly in different directions, I to Portland, they to Seattle. As we drove out of town, I asked Elijah to take a small detour and drive past my old veterinary clinic, past the beach where Oswald and I spent long evenings, past the school where my children attended, a little farewell trip through the places that made up the fabric of my life for so long. As we drove down Maple Street, I noticed a familiar figure standing at the window of an antique store. Beatrice watched our car, making no attempt to get out or wave. But when our eyes met, she nodded slightly, a gesture that could be interpreted as a final goodbye or an admission of defeat. I nodded back and we drove past. Was that Grandma? Elijah asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. Yes, I confirmed. He didn't say anything, but I noticed his hands tense on the steering wheel. She came to see me yesterday, I said. She brought a gift for Ariel, an antique silver rattle, a Clark family heirloom. And you accepted it? Rowena was surprised. Yes, I turned to her. No matter what, Beatrice is Ariel's grandmother, and someday, when the wounds have healed, you may want to tell your daughter about her. Not just the bad, but the good that was in her too. Elijah was silent for a long time, staring intently at the road. Maybe, he said at last. Someday? We pulled onto the main highway, leaving Chincoteague behind. Ariel, seated in the baby seat, chattered happily in her own language, pointing at the scenery passing by. Her dark hair glowed red in the sun, her eyes shining with curiosity about the world. A little girl who would never know the storm that caused her arrival, but who would inherit the strength and wisdom born from that storm? I looked at my daughter and son in law, at their mutual support and love, which has only grown stronger after all the trials, at my granddaughter, in whom the blood of several births flowed, blended into a unique, beautiful creature, and felt a strange peacefulness. We were leaving not as refugees fleeing conflict, but as explorers going in search of new life, leaving behind not only pain and disappointment, but also the valuable lessons we had learned from the experience. Lessons that family is not just about blood and a name, but about the choices we make every day. That the truth, no matter how bitter, is always better than the sweetest lie. And that sometimes you have to lose something familiar and comfortable to find something new and beautiful. When Chincoteague finally disappeared around the corner, I felt not regret, but lightness. There was a long road ahead, a new city, a new home, new opportunities. And most importantly, there was a family there, a real family built on love and mutual respect, not fear and control. Ready for a new adventure? I asked, looking back at my companions. More than ready, Rowena smiled, intertwining her fingers with Elijah's. Absolutely. He nodded, using his free hand to adjust the mirror so he could see his daughter. Ariel laughed, as if realizing the importance of the moment, and stretched her arms out into the sunlight streaming through the window. We were driving toward the future, leaving the shadows of the past behind. And in that moment, I knew we had made the right decision.